Welcome back, friends, and let's also gather our friends from the stalls. I know it's fun to be out there. We have a wonderful day today, which will go until 7 p.m. But also let's take the time to come in, be recharged with inspiration. Our next keynote is on the topic of dissolving the ego through selfless service. We have had an inspiring morning, and I think we've had a beautiful time out at the stalls, especially at the art exhibition. So now let's gather around back in the auditorium. We have Nayaswami Jaya and Nayaswami Dhyana with us, Ananda, India's spiritual directors, and they will be speaking with us on the topic of how to dissolve the ego through selfless service. You know, much of our life is consumed in outward activity, which we often dismiss as chores or burdens that we must carry. And we forget that in truth, they carry within them the seed of opportunity that will unravel the highest potential within us. So how can we see everything that we do instead of work? How can we see it as service? How can we find joy and inspiration through it? Nayaswami Jaya and Nayaswami Dhyana are a living testament of the fruits of a life of active service, selfless service. Founding members of Ananda India and many communities, teaching centers, meditation groups around the world. They are also authorized Kriyacharyas who are authorized to initiate people into Kriya Yoga. So I will now invite Nayaswami Jayaji to share some preliminary remarks on the topic of Seva, selfless service. We will be launching today Ananda Seva, and this is an inspiration that Nayaswami Jyotishji received after his visit to our charitable arm Yogananda Trust that serves over 3,000 widows in Vrindavan. And he was given these principles of service as a way to enlightenment, as a way to liberation, to inner freedom. So how can we find the same through our actions? So Jaya Swami Jayaji, please welcome and please share.
Thank you, Bhavani. That was a beautiful introduction, and I'd like to begin by echoing something that Jyotishji and Davidji said, and they were, in their welcome, their preliminary remarks, they were complimenting everybody here who has participated and worked very diligently, served very diligently to make this event possible. It reminded me of a story that we would keep in mind when we're thinking about Seva. During the time of Paramahansa Yogananda's life, in the latter part of his life, he had a small retreat in the desert outside of Los Angeles. And he liked to go there on seclusion, get away from the busyness. And when he would go there, he'd like to bring the monks with him because it kept the attunement with the monks, and they could learn and to be with him and in his presence. And he brought the monks with him when they would go out there. But when you have a group of young men like that, you need to keep them busy. It's a good thing to remember. keep them busy. And so what he did to accomplish that is he decided to make a small swimming pool out there, and they would create it by hand. They would work, put the monks to work, and they dug the swimming pool, took the earth out, and then eventually it came the time to pour the concrete to be able to line the pool that they had excavated. So they worked very hard. And of course, I'm guessing, because it was out in the desert, it was probably hot. And they worked and worked and worked all day pouring concrete. And hours would go by. But they were having a very joyous enthusiasm to make that happen, except for one. There was one monk who, it was hard work. It was hot work. And it came to a certain point during the day when he began to grumble. And he began to grumble to his fellow monks, "I didn't come here," meaning to the ashram, "I didn't come here to pour cement." And he quit, and he just stopped working and sat by the side, but everybody else continued. And there's a certain spirit when you're working together as a team, and I think all of you who participated in today's activities must have experienced that. You're working together as a team, you're building that energy, you're making something happen. And those of you who perhaps weren't here, you've been involved in things like that. And the energy was high, and they all had tremendous fun, and they worked late into the day. Perhaps even the sun was going down by the time they completed the work, because they couldn't stop. Once the concrete was beginning to be poured, they had to finish. And when it was completed, everybody who was working on that project was filled with energy. They were filled with joy. They were filled with enthusiasm, except for one. And the fellow who stood aside to conserve his energy, who didn't come there to pour cement, he was the exception. And I think you see from the experience that those of you who have participated in making this happen today, you've seen a demonstration of that, how much fun. And I think we talk about a quality or of such as seva or an activity such as seva. One of the qualities that makes work into seva is, does it have joy? Is there light, enthusiasm, happiness that goes with it? Because there's an old saying in the Western tradition, a saint who is a sad saint. And you find that if you're engaged in seva, you find that inevitably there's also joy in that experience as well. Now, there's a story, of course, it's well told, often told, of a lady, monastic, a nun in Yogananda's ashram, she was an elderly lady, and Master kept giving her work to do. But at the same time, he was telling her, you work too hard. Don't work so hard. And of course, she took that to heart, and she thought, I'll do a little bit less. At the same time, every day, Master would say that, don't work so hard, but in the evening, he would give her more work to do. And no matter how much and how efficiently and how energetically she accomplished those tasks, there was always more work to do, which she tried to do, and she worked harder and harder. And yet Master at the same time was saying, you work too hard. You work too hard. Don't work so hard. And she was in a conundrum of, he's saying one thing and demonstrating another. What do I do? Until one day, when he said that again, he says, don't work so hard. She said to him, Master, what if we substitute the word seva or service for work? And when she said that, Master laughed. He says, oh, now you understand. What changes work into service? And I think one of those qualities, of course, is demonstrated by what I've seen here today, is the enthusiasm and the joy that in which all of you have gone forward to make and accomplish what we've done here today. There was another story I'd like to share. This was from Swami Kriyananda's life, and it illustrates one of the principles that are embodied in the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. And it was one of the messages that underlied his mission to the West and ultimately his mission to the world at large. Swami Kriyananda was in the northwest of the United States, in the city of Vancouver, and he gave a program there. And at the conclusion of the program, one of his hosts, or perhaps a person who had come to the event, invited him to his home. This man was a successful businessman, and Swamiji, being gracious, went to the man's home, and the man began to show him his home, take him on a tour. And as the tour progressed, he said, I want to show you my meditation room. And he opened the door and ushered Swami Kriyananda into the room. And he says, and the man to Swamiji said, at the end of the day, I come home from work, I take off my shoes, I come here to this meditation room, and that's when my real day begins. And of course, he was expecting some comment from Swamiji, which of course Swamiji accommodated him. And Swami's words to him, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." Why live a dual life? And in other words, I have my work life and I have my meditation life. You've wasted half your day in your work. And this is the approach that many people think when they approach the spiritual path. I have my work day, and I have my spiritual life, I have my work life, I have my worldly life, and they're living a dual existence between the two. But really, Master came to give the message that in everything we do, why not bring spirituality into that? There's no real difference. Everything we do is following Dharma, doing that which needs to be done, and in a spiritual way, if we bring God into everything we do. Why not? Why not do it that way? And so consequently, it's an illustration of when we bring God into what we're doing, in a sense, we are converting work into service. And this is what he was encouraging this businessman to do, to be able to bring a joyfulness, a sense of self-offering, a sense of, as it was mentioned by Jyotish and Deviji, a sense of self-forgetfulness into what we're doing. You might say, in a spirit of giving versus gaining. What do I gain out of this? Is a subtle thought in the back of our mind as we're doing our day-to-day service. When we have that thought, inevitably, we're thinking of ourselves. Can we truly do nishkam karma, action without an expectation for the fruits of the action? Can we possibly do that if we're trying to do also? So if we're doing it in that consciousness, we're really working, because there's a sense of gain, that what are we gaining out of that? But if we can transcend that and turn everything into giving and self-forgetfulness of our own self, we find that in a very special way, in a very miraculous way, we begin to draw that energy into ourselves, just as those monks did when they were digging that swimming pool. They find they're full of energy, and especially if it has that quality of joyfulness. I think this is one of the things that qualifies something, if it's serviceful or if it's joyful. If you find a grudging person, they're doing, because all of us in life, we act and we think we're serving, but I don't think we are really serving if we're not joyfully serving. And that's, you might say, the threshold level, because if you're not expanding, and ultimately, we're not self-forgetful in that. We're thinking of ourselves. Otherwise, it would just naturally flow. Service is a natural quality to the spiritual path. I think for anybody who's a devotee, I think it does come naturally, and it's maybe a defining element, the self-forgetfulness, the transcendence of ego that goes with service. A story that comes to mind is, I was reminded of this story just recently, I have a friend, and he lives in Los Angeles now, but years ago, I was serving in the East Coast of America, and I came to know him because at that time in his life, he was living in New York City. And he lived across the river from New York City in New Jersey. It's another state across the river. And he'd ferry across to New York every day. And one day he went to work, and all of a sudden the news came over. He worked for Bloomberg Services, which is a large financial institution involving in banking and stocks. And all the employees there in the many floors in this large building had terminals, computer terminals there, and a message came across on the terminals, newsflash, an airliner a plane had accidentally run into the Twin Towers, one of the towers of the large building there in New York City, the tallest of the buildings in New York City. And they said, oh my gosh, how's that possible? And so they went, the employees, they went onto the roof of the building, because they were right there in the same district, and they looked, and sure enough, one of the towers was on fire. And they were watching that, and they were saying, how in the world? And they had heard that an airplane had crashed into it. And they said, what a terrible accident, that had happened here. And while they were watching, a second plane came and ran into the second tower. And they said, oh my God. And they knew immediately this was not an accident. And immediately, the news was transmitted throughout the building, evacuate the building immediately. And they said it was chaos ensued. People were immediately, panicked. They were running out into the streets. And he himself, he said, oh, I guess I need to do something. So he went out and he tried to get home across the river to where he lived on the other side, but he couldn't because all the transportation hubs had come to a stop. He couldn't find a way. But fortunately, he had a friend who lived in New York City, in the city side, and he went to that person's home and spent the night. And he did make it home the next day. Now, he was at home, and this momentous event had happened in his life. And he thought, well, I should go home, and I should, make sure I have everything, and who knows put his life in order. But by the end of the day, first day he was at home, he just couldn't do it. He couldn't start putting his own life in order, and he said he was impelled. It was like a force pulled him back across the river to go to the site where this had happened and volunteer. He went, so he did. The next day, he went across the river, went back to that site, and he volunteered. How can I help? How can I serve? And he began to serve, and he says his job was very simple. He was given the job of providing water, bringing water around and giving water to everybody who was there on the site. And he said he wasn't the only one, though. Others too. In a time of emergency, there's an impulse that goes through us. There's one impulse is if difficulties come, what is one impulse? Get away, run away, protect myself. And that, of course, was his first thought. Well, I've got to go home. But then he stopped to think about it, and another larger, stronger impulse came to him. I've got to go. I must go and help. And you find that now this man is a devotee, and I think it's a quality of people who have a little bit of an uplifted consciousness. At the same time, perhaps you want to protect yourself, but then you realize, I need to help. There's a saying that there's two types of people. When a fire comes, there's two types. One that want to run away from the fire, and the other one runs towards the fire to put it out. And I think the person who has an expanded sense of self is that one, the devotee at heart, that instinct is to solve the problem. So you could say, following on what Jyotishji and Devaji said, you have problems come. What is your reaction to when a problem comes, a difficulty comes? And those who you could say are leadership quality, people who are, you might say, responsible, that impulse to run toward the problem and fix it if necessary, or do what's necessary, appropriate at the right time, that impulse. And I think that's probably the impulse, certainly the impulse of all of you who are here serving this weekend, and I think the impulse of all of you who are coming here this weekend, because most people do not think that way. What is in it for me versus what is in it for everybody else? And Swami Kriyananda was once asked, how do you pick leaders in your organization? Because I think they were doing an interview, and they wanted to know, what do you do, Swamiji? What's your approach? And he had expected Swami just to answer, well, we give them this training, leadership training, and such and such and such and such. And he said none of that. Not to say that it wouldn't be helpful, but that certainly wasn't how he said, how do you choose leaders? And he said, we watch them. We watch people as time goes by. And as you watch people, you see, how do people respond? Who thinks when difficult times come, when challenges come, which, as David G. was saying, we are in an age of change, we are in an age of challenges. But it doesn't matter what age we're in. That's the nature of this world. We're going to be always challenged. There is no time, as long as we're here in this plane, when there will not be challenges. But when they come, how do we respond? And do we run toward the fire to put it out? Or do we run away from the fire to get away and save ourselves? And I think this is the mark. And he says, I look for people who are willing or who have the propensity to think of the welfare of others. And those are the ones that I feel that should be promoted and be developed, you might say, versus the very worldly and all too often what happens in times of challenge is to me and mine, myself. I have to protect myself, or you might say my family. I have to watch my family. Now, when I first came to these teachings, I had heard when Swami Kriyananda was telling about Paramahansa Yogananda, he was mentioning that many of his most advanced disciples, perhaps most of them really, were householders and business people, successful business people, or successful in some avenue of their life. And many of them were married as well, family men, family women. And it struck me because I had this idea that, well, if one is going to be a yogi, one's going to be a spiritual person, one should renounce that. And you might say that's not something that would define a person's success. But I was quite taken aback by that. But Master said, it's not whether a person is spiritual, whether a person is doing seva, is not defined by their outward action. In other words, the state of the duty or the task that they take up. You can't define a person by their occupation in terms of a spiritual sense. And so consequently, he said, in this age, we have entered into an age of energy, and we have, in consequence, the defining quality of energy needs to be applied to one's spiritual life as well, because it takes great energy. And then, taking that energy, the spiritual person, usually what happens is a person uses that energy for self-effort, it's their self-effort to improve their own lot. He says, but the challenge, you might say, for society right now, in this age, is to expand our sense of sympathy, of empathy, of compassion away from ourselves, and not to abandon self-interest, because for society as a whole, only a few are going to be able to do that. But our message is to get people to think in terms of enlightened self-interest. And when we do that, particularly by thinking, I too am benefited when I serve other people, when I expand my sense of reality. And Swami Kriyananda would put this in the context of saying, imagine you live in a village of 1,000 people. If your self-interest is directed toward yourself, you have 999 competitors. But if your consciousness is outwardly focused to helping others, the welfare of others, their interests, what benefits them, you have 999 friends. And in that simple switch, we find that we have entered into the realm of seva, We've entered in the realm of spirituality. We've entered into the realm of expansion of our own consciousness, our own sense of who we are. And when you have expansion, it's inevitable. It's a law of the universe. Expansion equals joy. You feel joyful. You feel happy. And so this, you could say, is particularly for society at large, is to help society in this age to understand that seva, even if there's some self-interest in there, our task is to expand that so that it's enlightened self-interest of helping everybody, and they'll come to understand it. Sometimes if we put the goal so far ahead that, I can't be spiritual until I left my job, I can't be spiritual until I transcend my ego, it's going to be a while. It's going to be a while. But we certainly can expand our sympathies to include others. And when we do that, we find that we have entered into the pathway that ultimately leads to freedom. Because what's happening when we do that? When we expand our sympathies, our little ego is expanded to include them in our world. And inevitably, that is the essence of what seva is finding outward ways, inward as well, to be able to do that and include others in our reality. And I think today, this fair that we're having is a demonstration of that. One, practically, by all of you coming here, helping to make this possible. But if you go outside and you look at the various avenues and ways that can be expressed outwardly and all the booths that are out there, I think all of us can find some way that we can participate in seva, bringing those qualities of expanding our sympathies to think of others. And just that act alone, you go to the market, think about the other people that are working in that store, send them joy, a smile, like I was saying, smile. And in a sense, you share your radiance with others, and in the process of that, your joy begins to grow. So you benefit, other people benefit. Our self-interest is not just aimed within ourselves. Master would use the term that in this age, we find that, like I said, many of Master's great disciples were married people. He says this is age, that's the average state of most people. He says it's a good state. It's helpful because marriage helps us expand our consciousness to include the welfare of others. He said, but unfortunately, people stop. They think of only their family. Take it a step further. To think of your co-workers. Think of the people, think of your customers. Think of your larger family, of your whole society as a whole. If we can include those, they too are my family, you'll feel just in that effort alone, you're performing an act of seva. And I think by doing that, by expanding that, and trying to find practical ways to put that into action, you'll find that we become, again, as was mentioned already, we become instruments of these teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, instruments of this message that is universally needed in the world today, being instruments of light to help this world heal and ultimately to bring about a better future for all of us. God bless all of you.
It's such a joy to greet you all, and so wonderful to hear these beautiful messages, these talks today about how we can put ourselves aside in these times that we're living. There's so much of a need. How can we be channels for light, for blessings, for grace, for help to others who are in need? How can we open ourselves to a flow of light, a flow from God, the flow of God in our lives to our families, our friends, our loved ones, but also those who aren't, those who are in need, who are around us. as we open ourselves as channels of light, we become more and more light. Our eyes change, our voices change, our auras change as we open ourselves to the flow of seva, the flow of service, the flow of help in this world that's so much in need. Paramahansa Yoganandaji said a very interesting statement. He said, I killed Yogananda long ago. Now only in this temple only God dwells. And I think ultimately we want to let go of everything that holds back the flow of grace and inspiration and ideas and solutions and everything that can come to us to help people around us and to help this world. And he also said another very interesting thing to some of the disciples, but I think he was looking out at many of us here too. He said, I see you all as light. You don't know how beautiful you are. Everything is filled with light. And that is the essence of the soul, the essence of who and what we really are. And that's what we have to share. It's not the darkness or my worries or my fears or whatever. And I remember I met in San Francisco many decades ago when we were living there at Ananda, a monk, a wonderful fellow, and he had a beautiful name. You may remember him, Brother Shunyabai. And Shunyabai means zero, brother zero. That he was saying, I just give my whole life to seva and to service and however I can help. And for each one of us, this is the goal of life, is to be able to open ourselves to others. I remember when I first came to Ananda some time back, I had no idea that life had to do with service. I thought it had to do with, and the path, that it had to do with meditation and my own meditation and how well am I meditating and on and on. And I found out as I went there, I saw people racing, serving other people, going here, helping that person, setting up a tent, cooking in the kitchen, and doing all kinds of things to help other people. It's the greatest thing I learned from Ananda, that it's not about you. It's not I, me, and mine. It's about how we can open ourselves to others. And it was such a wonderful learning. I remember sometimes I would go to Swami Kriyanandaji, our teacher, and I would say, well, Swamiji, I have this question about this particular thing, and he would give me something to do. And then I'd say, but he didn't really understand. Then I'd go back, but Swamiji, here's something else. Please answer this question. He said, here's something else to do. And many times I went to him with a confused mind, and he knew I wouldn't understand it. I needed to serve. I needed to get out of myself. I needed to get an energy flow. And that helped me so much. And there's a wonderful statement of Paramahansa Yoganandaji where he says, I will reason, a principle. I will. I will act. But guide thou, meaning the divine, guide my reason, my will, and my activity to the right path in every action. So we have to do our part. We can't just say, oh, I'm a channel of light, and you're not. But you have to put out the energy. And Swami Kriyanandaji, he tried this once because Yoganandaji had told him, as he lectured, to feel that it was God who was lecturing through him. And we all try to do that. And so Swami Kriyanandaji, right in the middle of one of his lectures, he said, well, my guru told me to do this, so I'm just going to not talk and see if God will speak. And so he stood there and he waited, and in his mind he was saying, say something, please talk. Nothing happened. And he kept waiting and waiting. 2 minutes, the audience was perspiring. They thought he had forgotten his words. And nothing happened because he had to change himself. He had to put the energy. And also another wonderful principle of Yoganandaji is the greater the will. Isn't that wonderful? Will, the power of the will. The greater the will. Now, don't get me wrong. Will means willingness. The greater the willingness, the greater the flow of the energy, then the greater the inspiration, the greater the magnetism, the greater your life becomes, the greater the willingness to open yourself, to be receptive to the flow of the universal grace. And look what one man, Swami Kriyanandaji, was able to do. He wrote, as Kartikeyanji was saying, he wrote 150 books. Every time I saw him, he was writing a book. Here, read this, read that. 150 books, that's a lot. 400 pieces of music, communities around the world, centers everywhere, lectured to thousands of people, had thousands of people who he counseled and helped. One person who said, I'm open to helping, to serving, to however, whatever I can do. And as Daviji was saying, often he wasn't well. He was still writing a book. He was still lecturing. He would come out onto the dais, could barely make it, and then he would stand up, or sometimes he would sit, boom, deliver the message. Because God was able to serve through him. And I think that's the point we have to remember. Don't put yourself, I can't do it, who am I? Nobody, that's who you are. Brother Shunyabhai, but we all are. But we say, no, maybe I am that. But I'm open and I'm willing to be a channel for seva in this world where it's so much needed today. And finally, I'll speak of the wonderful work you're going to hear from the Brindaban group in a moment, but was doing such a beautiful work there. The other principle I wanted to bring out is the channel is blessed of Yoganandaji's principles. The channel is blessed by what flows through it. Your life will be blessed. Did you see this beautiful choir here? Was anybody moping? I don't want to sing. They were singing out with joy. They had joy on their faces. So if you're in a choir, if you're doing healing prayer, if praying for other people, if you're teaching people, if you're a yoga teacher, whatever you're doing, if you say, no, I'm not doing it for recognition, like Yoganandaji gave one example of a man who he said he put $100 in the collection basket at his church. And he said, after that, now, what am I going to get? And Yoganandaji said, nothing. Because God, the divine, was already the $100. So if you think, I'm going to do it, so they see me, I did it, put my name up, it's just not that way. I do it out of love. I do it for the joy. I do it if nobody ever sees me. I do it because God is wanting to do it through me. And so this wonderful work that the Paramahansa Yogananda Public Charitable Trust, I've been there many times. I encourage all of you, and you'll be hearing from them just now, but the work is just so vibrant. And I've seen the people, the staff, they're completely changed because they're serving with the right spirit. That's the thing. They have no thought of themselves. They're just serving, giving joyfully. And the mothers, they receive not just a shawl or shoes or whatever, or food, housing, clothing. They receive the love of God. They receive caring, they receive joy. And the other wonderful thing about it, because it doesn't stop there. Okay, we're giving them so they're happy. No, they're giving back. Isn't that a wonderful thought? I met a lady one of the mothers who lived, I don't know now, but she lived in a box. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that. I saw people coming out of huts, blind, couldn't walk, and but they saw the Paramahansa Yogananda staff coming, and they just light up with a smile, because the staff was bringing them God, love, joy, peace into their lives. And the other thing is the mothers, they're giving to the staff. They're giving back to the Vrindavan. They're giving back to the world. And that's the most wonderful thing. It's not enough to, here's a blanket. What is that going to do for anybody? It keeps them warm for a while. But if you give higher consciousness, you give them something to do. The mothers make every year, I think it's 12,000 diyas to give out at Diwali time, to everybody they can give them to. The mothers, they do healing prayers for others. Now you see somebody who's laid out on a bed, they're doing healing prayers for other people, then we say, I'm not going to do anything. It just doesn't work. The mothers are chanting, they do kirtan and scripture reading. They help in the food preparation. They help with someone's not as ill, doesn't have as much illness as another. That one helps the other one. The mothers are changing because they have seva. Wow. Now that's the way you do it. You don't just give. And the last thing I'll say about that is they have what they call a circle of love, where one of the devotees, or anyone, not just the devotee, calls the mother once a week for 15 minutes and just talks to them. Now, who doesn't have 15 minutes? You can sign up today. And the key thing is, who's getting helped? That's the question. Who's getting helped? Sure, the mother, but circle of love. The people who call, I've seen them. Many are in tears. Many feel like that's like my own mother who I'm calling. And so everyone is who's involved, the channel is being blessed by what flows through it. And you'll hear more about that work in just a moment. But I'd like to close now because there are many other speakers who'll be coming today. And I'd like to close by actually doing something that helps us to feel energy, light, and joy through seva. So please sit up and inhale with a double breath. This will just be a couple of minutes. Inhale like this. Double breath and tense your body, vibrate. Now exhale, double breath through the mouth. Relax, relax. Get rid of the tensions. Again, inhale. Vibrate. Exhale. Now once more. Tense with willingness. Vibrate, feel prana. Exhale. This is a wonderful practice of Yoganandaji. Now rub your bare forearms. Run. We're bringing energy into our hands. We'll be doing a healing practice. Do the other arm. Rub your hands vigorously. Now hold your hands up, close your eyes, and just visualize anyone who you know who has a special need for healing. And visualize yourself as a channel, an instrument of seva, this seva of sending energy, healing vibrations from the whole universe, from the divine. Feel your hands, they're vibrating. The energy coming out, flow of prana. Rub the hands once more. In your mind, repeat these words as you feel energy and light coming out of your hands, going to the whole world or a particular person or situation or your work or your family. In your mind, repeat, I am submerged in eternal light. It permeates every particle of my being. I am living in that light. The divine presence fills me within and without. Once more, rub the hands and we'll chant Om now, sending out the eternal vibration of God into the ether. This is a practice of Paramahansa Yogananda Ji for healing vibrations into the world or to your loved ones, those who are in need. Chant along with me, Om. 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 Once more. Om. Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. God bless you all.
Thank you, Jaya ji and Dhyana ji, for a beautiful talk. You know, you can listen to these talks a number of times and still feel that inspiration anew. I joined Ananda in 2008, and since then have attended as many classes as I have could. And each time, you know, you just tune into a new insight, a new facet of the teachings. So thank you so much. It is so uniquely expressed through each one. We'll take a gentle pause now to include Sri Karthikeyan ji's request. He would like to felicitate Jyotish ji and Devi ji. So I invite Jyotish ji and Devi ji up on stage.
Both of you together.
Okay.
Thank you. He's a great, great friend to Ananda and to so many thousands and thousands of people around the world.
One of the great humanitarians of the
May
world
you-
today.
May you live long with excellent health, for good of humanity. Thank you. Swamiji expects you to do that and you are doing it. Thank you.
Thank you.